Now that Robert is gone, pack your bags and leave this house, my daughter-in-law said across the dinner table. My son didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. He simply lowered his eyes and took another sip of iced tea as though she had commented on the weather. I sat there for a moment, staring at the roast chicken I had spent 2 hours preparing, trying to understand how my life had unraveled so completely in the 7 days since my husband's funeral. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 71 years old, and until that evening I believed grief was the worst pain a person could carry. I was wrong. The dining room felt too large without Robert. The oak table that had hosted birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, and countless Sunday meals seemed strangely cold despite the summer heat outside. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked louder than usual. Every familiar sound felt distant, as though I were listening through water. I glanced toward Robert's empty chair. For 32 years that seat had belonged to him. Even now, part of me expected him to clear his throat and tell everyone to calm down. But there was only silence. You heard what Vanessa said, Jason finally muttered. His voice was barely above a whisper. This house is too much for you now. Too much for me. I almost laughed. I had painted every room in this house. I had planted the maple trees in the backyard with my own hands. I had spent decades paying bills, repairing broken appliances, and caring for every corner of the property. Yet suddenly I was being treated like a visitor who had overstayed her welcome. Vanessa folded her napkin carefully and placed it beside her plate. She always did things with calculated precision. You need to think realistically, Eleanor, she said. You're alone now. It's time to move somewhere more appropriate. Appropriate. Such a polite word for exile. I studied her face. Not a trace of sympathy. Not even an attempt to hide her impatience. 7 days earlier, she had stood beside me at Robert's funeral wearing black and speaking softly to guests about family and support. Now the mask had disappeared. I realized she must have been waiting for this moment. Perhaps for years. Jason finally looked at me. For a brief second, I searched his face for the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. I searched for the teenager who promised he would always take care of me when I got older. I searched for any sign that he remembered who I was. I found nothing. It's for the best, Mom, he said. You'll see that eventually. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, not because I accepted their decision, but because something inside me had gone strangely calm. People expect grief to make you emotional. Sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes it freezes every feeling until all that remains is observation. I stood up quietly. Vanessa seemed almost disappointed that I wasn't crying. Jason looked relieved that there would be no argument. I'll go upstairs, I said. I need some rest. Neither of them offered to help me. Neither apologized. As I climbed the staircase, my knees felt heavier than they had that morning. The hallway was dark except for the soft glow from the bedroom lamp I had forgotten to turn off. When I entered the room, Robert's reading glasses were still on the nightstand exactly where he had left them. His favorite cardigan still hung on the closet door. The sight nearly broke me. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hand against the blanket. For several minutes I simply listened to the silence. Then I noticed something. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. 3 months before his passing, Robert had come home from a meeting downtown and placed a manila envelope inside the bottom drawer of his desk. When I asked what it was, he smiled and said, "Just something important. If you ever need it, you'll know." At the time I thought nothing of it. Now, sitting alone in our bedroom, those words returned with startling clarity. If you ever need it, you'll know. Downstairs, I could hear Vanessa and Jason talking quietly. Their voices drifted through the floorboards. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the confidence in their laughter. They believed the story was over. They believed they had already won. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard Robert had loved. The moonlight shimmered across the grass. The old maple trees swayed gently in the warm Colorado breeze. For the first time all evening, I allowed myself a small smile. The next morning, I would leave the house exactly as they wanted. I would not argue. I would not beg. I would not fight. Instead, I would go somewhere they never expected me to go. And what I found there would change everything. The next morning I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds I forgot everything. Then I turned toward the empty side of the bed and reality settled over me once again. Robert was gone. The house no longer felt like home. And downstairs, two people were already planning a future that did not include me. I dressed quietly and made my way into the kitchen. The clock above the stove read 5:42 a.m. The same clock Robert used to check every morning before leaving for work. I reached automatically for a second coffee mug before stopping myself. Some habits survive grief. Others become reminders. I poured a single cup and stood by the window overlooking the backyard. The maple trees were glowing gold in the early morning light. Robert had planted the first one when Jason was 10 years old. The second came 5 years later. He used to joke that they would outlive all of us. Looking at them now, I realized he was probably right. The kitchen remained silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. No footsteps. No voices. Jason and Vanessa were still asleep. For the first time in years, I was grateful for that. I was not ready to see either of them. Instead, I carried my coffee into the living room. Family photographs covered the shelves. There was Jason in his Little League uniform. Jason graduating high school. Jason standing beside Vanessa on their wedding day. In every picture, Robert looked proud. Not proud of possessions or accomplishments. Proud of his family. Proud of the life we had built together. I wondered what he would think if he could see it now. The question stayed with me as I crossed the room toward his desk. It sat near the front window exactly as he had left it. Neat. Organized. Predictable. Robert believed every important document deserved a proper place. Insurance papers. Tax records. Utility bills. Everything labeled and filed. I opened the bottom drawer slowly. Inside were several folders, a stack of envelopes, and a small wooden box. My heart began beating faster. The manila envelope was still there. I recognized it immediately. It rested beneath a folder marked property records. For several seconds I simply stared at it. Then I picked it up. My name was written across the front in Robert's handwriting. Eleanor. Nothing else. No instructions. No explanation. Just my name. I sat in his chair and carefully opened the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The letter was short. Much shorter than I expected. Eleanor, if you are reading this, something has happened that made you doubt the people around you. If that day ever comes, do not panic. Go to First Mountain Bank. Ask for Daniel Mercer. He will know what to do. Trust him. Most importantly, trust yourself. Love always, Robert. I read the letter 3 times. Then a fourth. Daniel Mercer. The name meant nothing to me. Robert had never mentioned him. Not once in 32 years of marriage. Yet Robert was not a man who acted without reason. If he had left those instructions behind, he had expected me to follow them. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Someone was awake. I folded the letter and slipped it into my purse. Moments later, I heard footsteps crossing the hallway. Then another door opened and closed. The day was beginning. I returned the empty coffee mug to the sink and headed for the front door. Halfway there, Jason appeared at the top of the staircase. His hair was messy and his expression tired. For an instant he looked like the boy I remembered. "You are up early," he said. "Could not sleep," I replied. He nodded awkwardly. Neither of us mentioned the previous night. Neither of us apologized. "Where are you going?" he finally asked. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder. "I have a few things to take care of." He seemed ready to ask another question, but Vanessa suddenly appeared behind him. Her expression hardened the moment she saw me standing near the door. "Good," she said. "The sooner you start making arrangements, the easier this will be." I looked at her calmly. No anger. No argument. No tears. Just calm. Something about that seemed to unsettle her. I opened the door and stepped outside. The Colorado morning air felt cool against my face. For the first time in a week, I felt something other than grief. It was not hope. Not yet. But it was close. I climbed into my car and started the engine. As the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, Robert's words echoed in my mind. "Go to First Mountain Bank. Ask for Daniel Mercer. He will know what to do." An hour later, I pulled into the parking lot. And the moment I walked through those glass doors, I realized my husband had been protecting me long before anyone else knew I needed protection. The lobby of First Mountain Bank was quieter than I expected. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, reflecting off polished marble floors. People moved calmly between offices and teller stations, carrying on with ordinary lives that seemed completely disconnected from mine. I stood there for a moment clutching my purse, feeling strangely nervous. Robert had never sent me on errands without explaining why. Yet here I was following instructions written in a letter he had prepared months earlier. A receptionist greeted me with a warm smile and asked if she could help. I told her I was looking for Daniel Mercer. The moment I said his name, her expression changed slightly. Not alarm. Not surprise. Recognition. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly for a few seconds, then asked me to take a seat. 5 minutes later, a tall man in his early 60s walked into the lobby. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his navy suit looked expensive without being flashy. The moment he saw me, he smiled gently. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked. I nodded. "I am Daniel Mercer." He extended his hand. "I have been expecting you." Those words stopped me cold. Expecting me. Robert had passed away only a week earlier. No one should have been expecting me. Yet Daniel seemed completely unsurprised by my arrival. He guided me toward a private office overlooking the foothills beyond town. Once the door closed, he offered me coffee. I declined. My hands were already shaking enough. Daniel sat across from me and folded his hands neatly on the desk. "Robert spoke very highly of you," he said. The mention of my husband immediately tightened something in my chest. "You knew him?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "For more than 20 years. 20 years. I stared at him. Robert and I shared nearly every detail of our lives. Or so I thought. Yet somehow I had never heard this man's name before. Daniel seemed to notice my confusion. "Your husband valued privacy when it came to financial matters," he explained. "Especially where your future was concerned." Future. The word lingered in the room. Daniel opened a file drawer beside his desk and removed a thick folder. My name was printed across the front. Eleanor Whitmore. He placed it carefully on the desk between us. "Before we continue," he said, "I need to ask a simple question. Did something happen after Robert's passing that caused you concern?" I thought about Vanessa. About the dinner table. About Jason looking away while his wife told me to leave my own home. I thought about the strange confidence both of them carried, as if ownership of everything had already been settled. "Yes," I answered quietly. "I believe it did." Daniel nodded slowly, as though my answer confirmed something he already suspected. He opened the folder. Inside were documents, letters, account statements, and legal forms. More paperwork than I could process at a glance. "Robert was a careful man," Daniel said. "He believed preparation was an act of love." I felt tears threatening to form but forced them back. Daniel continued. "Several years ago, he instructed us to establish certain protections. He hoped they would never be needed. But he wanted them available if circumstances changed." Circumstances changed. Such a polite phrase for betrayal. My eyes moved across the documents. Most of the language was legal and difficult to follow. Then I noticed a familiar address. Our address. The house. My pulse quickened. "Daniel," I said carefully, "why are these here?" He adjusted his glasses. "Because Robert wanted to ensure there would never be confusion regarding ownership." Ownership. The word landed heavily. For the first time since entering the bank, I felt genuine fear mixed with curiosity. Daniel turned several pages before stopping on a specific document. He studied it briefly before closing the folder again. To my surprise, he did not hand it to me. Instead, he leaned back slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "before I show you everything, there is something you should understand." Robert anticipated pressure from people who might misunderstand his intentions after he was gone. I immediately thought of Jason and Vanessa. Daniel must have seen the realization in my face because he nodded almost imperceptibly. "He loved his family," Daniel continued. "But he loved you first." The room fell silent. Outside the window, a breeze moved through the trees on the hillside. Somewhere down the hallway, a phone rang. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet my entire world seemed to be shifting beneath my feet. Daniel placed one hand on the closed folder. "What I am about to show you," he said quietly, "is the reason Robert never worried about your future." Then he opened the folder to a page that made my heart stop. For several seconds I could not speak. I simply stared at the document while Daniel waited patiently across the desk. The page contained my name, Robert's name, and the address of our home. I read the first paragraph once, then again, then a third time because I was convinced I had misunderstood it. "This cannot be right," I whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "It is correct." My eyes returned to the page. Years earlier, Robert had established a trust. Not for himself. Not for Jason. For me. The house had been transferred into that trust long before his passing. According to the documents, I was the sole beneficiary during my lifetime. No sale, transfer, refinance, or ownership change could occur without my written approval. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Suddenly, dozens of conversations from the past began replaying in my memory. Small moments I had dismissed at the time. Vanessa asking unusual questions about property taxes. Vanessa wanting to know where important documents were stored. Vanessa casually bringing up retirement communities during family dinners. At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Now those memories felt different. Deliberate. Calculated. Daniel opened another section of the folder. "There is more," he said. My stomach tightened. More. I was not sure I could handle more. Yet Robert apparently had. Daniel slid another document across the desk. This one outlined additional financial arrangements. Monthly income distributions. Emergency funds. Investment accounts. Every page carried Robert's signature. Every page reflected years of careful planning. Why did he never tell me? I asked quietly. Daniel folded his hands. Because he hoped none of this would ever be necessary. The answer sounded exactly like something Robert would say. He was never dramatic. Never suspicious. But he believed in preparation. I remembered a snowstorm years earlier when he spent an entire Saturday stocking flashlights, batteries, and bottled water in the garage. The storm never came. When I teased him about it, he smiled and said, "The best plans are the ones you never need." Sitting in Daniel's office, I realized he had applied the same philosophy to our future. I looked down at the papers again. My vision blurred slightly. Not from confusion this time. From gratitude. Even after his passing, Robert was still protecting me. Daniel allowed me a moment before speaking again. "There is one thing you should know," he said carefully. "Your husband updated these arrangements several times during the last 5 years. 5 years. The number caught my attention immediately. "Why?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "Because he became increasingly concerned." Concerned. Another carefully chosen word. I studied his face. Concerned about what? Daniel glanced toward the folder. About pressure from family members regarding assets and property. The room became very still. I thought about Jason again. Not the little boy who used to build blanket forts in the living room. The man he had become. The man who sat silently while his wife told his widowed mother to leave her home. A painful realization settled over me. Robert had seen warning signs long before I had. Perhaps that was why he never seemed surprised when Vanessa made inappropriate comments about money. Perhaps that was why he occasionally changed the subject whenever inheritance discussions surfaced during holidays. He had been paying attention while I was busy trying to keep peace in the family. Daniel handed me a sealed envelope. Unlike the others, this one was written entirely in Robert's handwriting. "He asked that you receive this only if you ever came here personally," Daniel said. My hands trembled as I accepted it. The paper felt familiar. Robert always preferred fountain pens. The blue ink was unmistakable. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. It was shorter than the first one. "Eleanor, if you are reading this," then events unfolded exactly as I feared. "Do not waste your energy on anger. Some people reveal themselves only when they believe they have already won. Let them. The truth has a way of arriving on its own schedule. Trust the documents. Trust Daniel. Most importantly, trust your instincts. You have always been stronger than you think. I miss you already. Love, Robert." By the time I finished reading, tears were sliding silently down my cheeks. Not tears of grief alone. Something else. Relief. Clarity. Strength. For an entire week, I had felt abandoned. Now I understood that Robert had spent years quietly building a safety net beneath me. Daniel waited respectfully while I folded the letter and placed it inside my purse. Then he opened a final section of the folder and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "there is one more detail your son and daughter-in-law almost certainly do not know." I looked up slowly. "What detail?" Daniel turned the page toward me. The moment I saw the heading, I realized everything waiting for me at home was about to change. I lowered my eyes to the page Daniel had turned toward me. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. The heading was legal language, the kind Robert always handled because he enjoyed reading documents that made my head ache after 3 sentences. Daniel gave me a moment before speaking. "Your husband included a conditional provision," he said. "A very specific one." I looked up. "Conditional?" He nodded. Robert believed that character is revealed during moments of inheritance, grief, and financial pressure. He wanted certain protections in place if anyone attempted to force decisions regarding your residence or assets. My heart began beating faster. Daniel pointed to a paragraph halfway down the page. I read carefully. Then I read it again. According to the provision, any attempt by family members to pressure, manipulate, or coerce me into surrendering my residence, financial rights, or trust benefits would immediately trigger a review by the trust administrator. Certain distributions intended for future heirs could be delayed, reduced, or redirected entirely based on that review. I stared at the words in disbelief. Robert had not simply protected me. He had anticipated exactly what might happen. "He knew," I whispered. Daniel chose his next words carefully. I believe Robert hoped he was wrong. A painful silence settled between us. Hope. That sounded like Robert. He always believed people could be better than they often were. I thought back to countless family gatherings over the years. Small comments that seemed harmless at the time. Vanessa asking whether maintaining a large house was practical for older people. Vanessa joking about downsizing. Vanessa bringing brochures from retirement communities and leaving them on the kitchen counter with a smile that never reached her eyes. At the time, I dismissed it as enthusiasm. Now every memory felt different, like puzzle pieces finally locking into place. Daniel closed the folder gently. "There is something else you should understand," he said. "Nothing happens automatically. Evidence matters. Facts matter." I nodded slowly. Meaning that assumptions alone are not enough. But documented behavior can be. My thoughts immediately returned to the dinner table. Vanessa telling me to pack my bags. Jason sitting there silently. Their certainty. Their impatience. Their assumption that the house already belonged to them. Daniel slid a business card across the desk. "If anyone asks you to sign anything, contact me first." I picked up the card and placed it inside my purse beside Robert's letter. For the first time in days, I felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. Grief had clouded everything since Robert's passing. I had been moving through each day like someone walking through fog. Now the fog was beginning to lift. The facts were simple. I owned nothing less than I had owned a week earlier. My rights remained intact. My home remained protected. Most importantly, the future Vanessa seemed so confident about did not actually exist. Daniel walked me to the lobby. Before I left, he stopped beside the entrance doors. "Mrs. Whitmore?" I turned back. "Yes. Robert trusted your judgment. Do not underestimate that." I thanked him and stepped outside. The afternoon sun felt warmer than it had that morning. As I crossed the parking lot, I noticed something had changed inside me. Earlier, I had arrived feeling frightened and uncertain. Now I felt steady. Not victorious. Not yet. But steady. During the drive home, I kept remembering something Robert used to say whenever a problem seemed overwhelming. He would smile and tell me that panic never improved a situation. Information did. At the time, I thought it was simply one of his practical habits. Now I understood it was wisdom. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. Not because the house had changed. Because I had. The curtains in the front windows were open. Vanessa's car sat beside Jason's truck. Everything appeared normal from the outside. Yet beneath that ordinary surface, the balance of power had shifted completely. They just did not know it yet. I gathered my purse and stepped out of the car. Through the front window, I caught sight of movement inside. Vanessa was standing in the dining room talking on her phone. Papers were spread across the table. She looked excited, confident, almost celebratory. As I quietly approached the front porch, a gust of wind carried part of her conversation through the slightly open window. "It will not take much longer," she said. "Once the house situation is settled, everything else becomes easy." I froze. My hand remained inches from the doorknob. Inside, Vanessa laughed softly. Then she said something that made me realize her plans were far bigger than simply forcing me out of my home. I remained outside for several seconds, listening carefully. Vanessa lowered her voice after that sentence, making the rest of the conversation impossible to hear. Eventually, she ended the call and gathered the papers from the dining room table. By the time I opened the front door, she was walking toward the kitchen with a smile that appeared entirely too pleasant. "You are back," she said. "Did you have a productive morning?" There was something almost rehearsed about the question. I placed my purse on the entry table and nodded. "Very productive." For a brief moment, I thought I saw uncertainty flash across her face. Then it disappeared. Jason emerged from the family room carrying a coffee mug. He looked tired. The dark circles beneath his eyes seemed deeper than they had a week earlier. Grief affects everyone differently, but there was something else there as well. Stress, worry, pressure. "Mom," he said, "we were wondering when you would be back." "We." Not him. "We." I noticed that nearly every sentence he spoke now included Vanessa in some way. The distinction might have seemed small to someone else. To a mother, it felt enormous. "I had errands," I replied calmly. Vanessa glanced toward the dining room. "Actually, there is something we wanted to discuss." Of course there was. I followed them into the dining room and immediately noticed that the papers I had seen through the window were still there. Several brochures sat stacked beside a notebook. One of them displayed photographs of a retirement community located about 90 miles away. Another contained floor plans for small assisted living apartments. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Vanessa sat down and folded her hands. "We have been researching options," she said. "Options." Such a polite word. "You have been busy," I answered. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Vanessa pushed one of the brochures toward me. "There are wonderful communities designed specifically for seniors. Activities, transportation, healthcare support, everything in one place." I glanced at the glossy photographs. Smiling retirees played cards and walked through gardens. Everyone looked delighted. Everyone looked carefully selected by a marketing department. "I see," I said. Vanessa smiled. "We just want what is best for you." Once upon a time, those words would have comforted me. Now they sounded like a sales pitch. I looked at Jason. "And what do you think?" He stared down at the table before finally answering. "Maybe it would make things easier." Easier. Not better. Not happier. Easier. I remembered Daniel's advice. Facts matter. Information matters. Reactions matter. So instead of arguing, I asked a simple question. "What happens to the house?" The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it was enough. Vanessa answered immediately. Too quickly. "We would handle it." Not "we might." Not "we could." "We would." The confidence in her voice told me more than any document ever could. She already considered the outcome decided. I nodded slowly and pretended to study the brochure. Inside, my thoughts were racing. Daniel had been right. Robert had been right. They were not asking. They were guiding, pressuring, steering. Every conversation seemed carefully designed to push me toward a single destination. Vanessa leaned forward. "You do not have to decide today," she said. "But there is no reason to delay planning." I almost smiled at that. 24 hours earlier, those words would have terrified me. Now they sounded strangely hollow. Because for the first time since Robert's passing, I understood something they did not. The house was not slipping away from me. Their assumptions were. Eventually the conversation ended. Jason disappeared upstairs. Vanessa carried the brochures into the kitchen. I remained alone in the dining room. Sunlight stretched across the table where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals over 3 decades. For a long moment, I simply sat there listening to the familiar ticking of the grandfather clock. Then my gaze settled on a legal pad partially hidden beneath one of the brochures. Vanessa must have forgotten it in her rush to clear the table. I hesitated. Then I looked closer. Several handwritten notes covered the page. Property value estimates, renovation ideas, potential sale projections. And at the bottom, circled twice in dark ink, were 4 words that made my blood run cold. After Eleanor moves out. I stared at the phrase for a very long time. Then I carefully returned the paper exactly where I had found it. Because in that moment, I realized I no longer needed to guess what they were planning. Now I had proof. That evening, I carried myself through the house as though nothing had changed. Vanessa prepared dinner. Jason watched television in the family room. The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm in the hallway. Everything appeared normal. Yet beneath the surface, I felt as though I had finally stepped behind a curtain and seen the machinery that had been operating around me for years. The difference now was that I was no longer confused. I knew exactly what they wanted. More importantly, I knew they did not realize I knew. During dinner, Vanessa was unusually cheerful. She spoke about home improvement projects and neighborhood property values. At one point, she even pulled out her phone to show Jason photographs of renovated kitchens. This layout would open up the entire first floor, she said enthusiastically. Jason nodded while barely looking at the screen. Looks nice. Vanessa smiled. It would add tremendous value. I quietly buttered a dinner roll and listened. Every sentence sounded different now. Every casual remark revealed a little more of the future she imagined for herself. A future built on assumptions that no longer existed. After dinner, Jason followed me onto the back porch. The sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains, leaving streaks of orange and gold across the sky. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then he leaned against the railing and sighed heavily. "Mom," he said quietly, "Vanessa means well." I looked out toward the maple trees Robert had planted years earlier. "Does she?" I asked. Jason hesitated. "She just worries about practical things." Practical things. Money. Property. Control. It was remarkable how often selfishness disguised itself as practicality. "Do you?" I asked. He frowned slightly. "Do I what? Worry about practical things?" He looked away. "Someone has to." The answer hurt more than I expected. Not because it was cruel. Because it sounded rehearsed. Like something repeated often enough to become a belief. I studied my son carefully. For the first time I noticed how tired he looked. The tension around his eyes. The uncertainty hidden beneath his confidence. Perhaps he was not leading this plan at all. Perhaps he was simply following it. The thought did not excuse his behavior, but it complicated it. Before either of us could continue, Vanessa stepped onto the porch carrying a folder. My attention immediately settled on it. "Perfect timing," she said brightly. "I was hoping we could review a few things together." Jason straightened. Vanessa sat down and opened the folder across the patio table. Several pages were clipped neatly together. My pulse quickened. Daniel's warning echoed in my mind. "If anyone asks you to sign anything, contact me first." Vanessa slid the papers toward me. "Nothing official," she said quickly. "Just preliminary information." I lowered my eyes to the pages. The first document outlined estimated moving expenses. The second contained contact information for senior housing communities. The third was more interesting. Much more interesting. It listed potential timelines for preparing the house for sale. Sale. There it was. In black and white. Not an option. Not a possibility. An expectation. Vanessa watched my face carefully. Waiting. Measuring. Hoping. I turned a page slowly and then another. "You have certainly done a lot of research," I said. Her smile widened. "I wanted to be prepared." Prepared. The word almost made me laugh. Robert had spent years preparing. Daniel had spent years preparing. Compared to them, Vanessa was improvising. I closed the folder and handed it back. "Thank you," I said calmly. "I will think about it." Her smile faltered slightly. "That is all. That is all." The disappointment on her face lasted only a second before she masked it again. But I saw it. She expected progress, commitment, momentum. Instead, she received patience. And patience was becoming her greatest obstacle. Later that night, after everyone had gone upstairs, I sat alone in Robert's study. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar wood. I opened the drawer where he kept stationery and removed a legal pad. Then I began writing. Dates, conversations, comments, documents, everything, every detail I could remember. If facts mattered, I intended to preserve them. Nearly an hour passed before I finally set down my pen. As I closed the notebook, my phone vibrated on the desk. A text message had arrived from an unfamiliar number. For a moment I considered ignoring it. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Daniel Mercer. We need to speak tomorrow morning. Something important has come to my attention. The next morning, I arrived at First Mountain Bank 15 minutes early. Daniel was already waiting. The moment I saw his expression, I knew this was not a routine follow-up meeting. He led me directly into his office and closed the door behind us. The usual warmth in his demeanor remained, but there was a seriousness that had not been there before. Thank you for coming so quickly, he said. I sat down and placed my purse beside my chair. Your message sounded urgent. Daniel nodded. Then he opened a folder that appeared much thinner than the ones I had reviewed before. Yesterday evening, our legal department completed a routine review connected to your trust. My stomach tightened slightly. And Daniel folded his hands. Someone recently contacted a local real estate attorney regarding your property. For a moment, I did not understand what he was saying. Then the meaning settled over me. My property? Daniel nodded. Specifically, inquiries were made regarding potential ownership transfer timelines after your husband's passing. I felt a chill move through me despite the warm office. Who made the inquiry? Daniel hesitated. The attorney would not disclose that information directly. However, based on the circumstances, I believe you can make your own conclusions. Vanessa. I did not need proof to know it. The timing alone told the story. Daniel continued. No legal action was taken. No documents were filed. But the inquiry itself is significant. I remembered the notes on the legal pad. Property value estimates. Renovation plans. Sale projections. After Eleanor moves out. Suddenly those words seemed even more revealing. What does this mean? I asked quietly. Daniel opened the folder and removed a single document. It means your husband's concerns were not hypothetical. The room became very still. For years, I had convinced myself that family tensions were misunderstandings, personality conflicts, normal disagreements. Now evidence was beginning to replace assumptions. Daniel slid the paper toward me. It summarized recent trust activity and included recommendations from the trust administrator. Near the bottom was a sentence that immediately captured my attention. Beneficiary Welfare Review recommended. What is that? I asked. A formal process, Daniel explained. It allows the trust administrator to evaluate whether the beneficiary is experiencing undue pressure regarding housing or financial decisions. Pressure. Such a polite word for what had been happening inside my home. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Whitmore, I am going to give you a recommendation. You are free to ignore it if you choose. I nodded. Go ahead. Stop reacting privately. Start documenting publicly. I frowned. Meaning, if conversations occur, write them down. If proposals are presented, save them. If pressure continues, keep records. Facts create clarity. Robert had said something similar for years. Daniel sounded almost identical to him in that moment. I left the bank carrying copies of several documents and a growing sense that events were accelerating. During the drive home, I noticed something unexpected. I was no longer afraid of what Vanessa might say next. Fear thrives in uncertainty. Knowledge changes that. When I arrived home, both cars were already in the driveway. As I stepped inside, I immediately heard voices coming from the dining room. Jason and Vanessa were talking. They stopped the moment they saw me. There you are, Vanessa said with a smile that appeared unusually bright. We were actually discussing something important. I almost laughed. Every important discussion lately seemed to involve my future and my house. I set my purse down and waited. Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Jason. Then she spoke. "We think it is time for a family meeting." Family meeting. The phrase sounded harmless. Yet something about her excitement felt different. Larger. More confident. Jason shifted in his seat. Vanessa continued. "This weekend. Everyone should be there." "Everyone?" I asked. "Your sister Margaret. Jason's cousin Ethan. A few close relatives. We all need to discuss the future." The future. Another familiar word. I studied her carefully. She looked almost triumphant. As though she believed the outcome was already guaranteed. "That seems sudden," I said. "Not really," Vanessa replied. "There are decisions that cannot wait forever." There it was again. Urgency. Pressure. Momentum. The same pattern repeated in conversation after conversation. I looked at Jason. "Do you agree?" He hesitated before answering. "I think it might help everyone move forward." Move forward. I nodded slowly. Then I surprised them both. "All right," I said. Vanessa blinked. "All right. Let us have the family meeting." For the first time, genuine surprise crossed her face. She had expected resistance, debate, delay. Instead, she received cooperation. What she did not realize was that cooperation and surrender are not the same thing. That evening, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in Robert's study and reread his final letter. One sentence stood out more than all the others. "Some people reveal themselves only when they believe they have already won. Let them." I folded the letter carefully and returned it to my purse. Then I looked around the room Robert had loved so much. The books. The desk. The photographs. The memories. In 3 days, the family meeting would take place. Vanessa believed it would secure her future. Jason believed it would solve a problem. But neither of them knew what Daniel had uncovered. And neither of them had any idea what would be waiting for them when that meeting finally began. The family meeting took place on Saturday afternoon. By noon, the house was full of familiar faces. My sister Margaret arrived carrying a peach pie. My nephew Ethan brought a bottle of sparkling cider. A few relatives gathered in the living room, speaking quietly and offering condolences that still felt fresh despite the passing days. Through it all, Vanessa moved through the house with unusual energy. She smiled often. She organized chairs. She directed conversations. She behaved less like a grieving daughter-in-law and more like someone preparing for an announcement. Jason remained quieter. He greeted relatives politely, but I noticed he rarely looked directly at me. By 2 o'clock, everyone had settled into the dining room. The same room where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals. The same room where Vanessa had told me to leave. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the polished oak table. For a brief moment, I imagined Robert sitting at the head of it, observing everything with that calm expression he always wore when people underestimated him. Vanessa stood first. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We thought it would be helpful for the family to discuss next steps and make sure everyone is on the same page moving forward." Several relatives nodded politely. Vanessa continued speaking about practical matters, maintenance costs, property responsibilities, future planning. The language sounded reasonable. That was what made it effective. Manipulation often wears the clothes of common sense. Finally, she turned toward me. "Eleanor has a lot to consider," she said, "and we all want what is best for her." I noticed Margaret frowned slightly. Ethan shifted in his seat. Even they seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Then Vanessa said the word she had clearly been building toward. "The house is simply too much for one person." Silence followed. She looked around the room as though expecting agreement. Instead, nobody spoke. That was when I gently placed my hands on the table and stood. Every eye turned toward me. Vanessa looked surprised. Jason looked nervous. I smiled politely. "You are right about one thing," I said. "There has been a great deal of discussion about this house." Vanessa relaxed slightly. She thought I was agreeing with her. "Exactly," she said. I nodded. "Which is why I spent the last several days gathering information." The room became very quiet. I reached into my purse and removed a folder. Not thick. Not dramatic. Just facts. Robert always preferred facts. I placed the documents on the table. A few days ago, I met with Daniel Mercer. The color immediately shifted in Vanessa's face. Not dramatically, just enough. Jason looked confused. "Who is Daniel Mercer?" he asked. "A man your father trusted for more than 20 years, I replied. I opened the folder and calmly explained the trust, the protections, the ownership structure, the provisions Robert had established years earlier. No raised voice, no accusations, just information, the kind Robert valued most. As I spoke, expressions changed around the table. Surprise, confusion, understanding. Vanessa remained perfectly still. Jason stared at the documents as though they were written in another language. When I finished, silence filled the room once again. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Robert planned all of this years ago?" "Yes," I answered. "He did." Ethan shook his head slowly. "Sounds like he wanted to make sure Aunt Eleanor was protected." "He did," I said again. Vanessa finally found her voice. "There must be some misunderstanding." I looked at her calmly. "There is not." She glanced toward Jason, searching for support. But Jason was no longer looking at her. He was staring at the table. For the first time since Robert's funeral, he appeared genuinely unsettled. I reached into the folder one last time and removed Robert's letter. "My husband left me many gifts," I said softly. "But the greatest one was not this house. It was clarity." The room remained silent. No arguments followed. No dramatic confrontation. None was necessary. The truth had already done its work. After a few minutes, relatives began standing and quietly leaving the table. Conversations shifted. The meeting dissolved on its own. Vanessa sat motionless. Jason remained seated beside her, lost in thought. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked into the backyard alone. The maple trees swayed gently in the Colorado breeze. The mountains glowed beneath the fading sunset. For the first time since Robert passed away, the weight pressing against my chest felt lighter. Not because I had won anything, not because someone else had lost, but because I no longer doubted myself. I looked up at the sky and smiled. Robert had been right. Some people reveal themselves only when they believe they have already won. And sometimes the strongest response is not anger, revenge, or triumph. Sometimes it is simply standing your ground long enough for the truth to arrive.